Hello and welcome to Manic Mic'd Up. We are still doing the 30-day dialogue challenge, but I think yesterday I might have missed dialogue. And then this little riff came in my head. Mystified, I might have missed a day of dialogue. Yeah, that's it. Mystified, I might have missed a. Mystified, I might have missed a day of dialogue. I think what I'm leaning into is making this a little bit more artful at some point. One day it won't be so much about documenting as about crafting something a little bit more artful. Until then, this is definitely heartful. So because of that, I don't have as much meta commentary, but I will say that I am simmering some tea on the stove. So I'm taking my own advice and I set a timer so I won't go to bed and forget about it. And also I made some fruit ice cream in the Yonanas machine. And I realized that I don't really like pineapple in it because it leaves these chunks, these little chunks of pineapple. And they're kind of chewy. So I'm putting the pineapple part of the mixed bag of fruit in a smoothie, and the peaches and strawberries, and I don't know what else is in there, in the ice cream, as well as a banana. So I guess it's ice fruit. And today I was working on figuring out how to make a YouTube short. And Substack makes clips, but only if you post a video. It doesn't do it for audio. And I find the clips aren't that great, it's not necessarily the most relevant points. So I tried to find a short snippet of me saying something, got that. I spent a long time today finding all my videos that I've taken myself so I don't have to use AI videos. And then apparently you can add captions with Adobe Express for free. So this took all day and I have a lot of other projects to work on. So it's going to take 2 days worth of time to figure out how to create a YouTube short. I still need to figure out what to put in the description and all that, and then actually making them. I think I was hoping to outsource that at some point, but it looks like I'm going to have to learn it because I'm just not a short form content kind of person. You may have noticed. So why am I bringing that up? Well, the clip that I grabbed was from one of my conversations with omnipolar potential explorer, and I was talking about the word sloved, which is the past participle, I think that's how you say it, of Slived, which is an archaic word. And Slived means one of the definitions is to move furtively. So I wrote down, I have a sticky note here that says, have a furtive mania, to have a fertile mania, to avoid a futile future. That was just a little riff that came through. I may as well read some of these little bits I wrote on a sheet of paper. Map of memes like a dream book guide. Language and water. There's some kind of association there. Maybe when we're more hydrated, we might be able to access language a little bit more. People are starving for meaning, which is starving for seeing. The ego filter starves us. It's one thing to think that, we all have an ego or whatever. We don't realize that it's actually starving us. We can't taste, touch, smell, see meaning. There was an Adyashanti quote that said, causeless meaning is everywhere for those with eyes to see it. I've never read any Adyashanti, but I did see that quote, and I think it's very, very good. So it's for those, it's for anyone who can see it, right? Who has eyes to see it. Eyes to see meaning. Years ago, I would write down the letter I, and the number 2, and small letter C. Eyes to see. So it's like eyes to see meaning. And what is meaning? Well, meaning is like a rainbow. A rainbow is there when there's light at a certain angle and water, droplets, and somebody to see it, so human eyes, right? So it's the same sort of thing with meaning. There's like basically a rainbow of meaning and perceptions that we could have, but the filter of the ego makes us seek and project what we've been programmed to see and seek and project. So it would be like seeing one little spot on the rainbow at a time and not realizing there's a whole rainbow there. We just look at one spot and then there's purple, and then we look at one spot and then there's red, and then we look at another spot and then there's yellow. And we never see that there's a whole rainbow. And then that rainbow has meaning, right? So there's a new rainbow every moment with a different meaning. And it's a different something. It's not even a rainbow each moment. It's the whole cosmos each moment. And it's never the same again. So that we need to be able to see something new. Because what we already know and we've already seen and we already were programmed with naturally doesn't have meaning because it's not new. And the moment is always new. So that's the truth, right? So something new seen is truth, subjectively, from an individual's point of view. That's their truth at the moment. And this relates to a YouTube video I'm going to watch again. And I won't be able to say this well because I just sort of watched the first few minutes quickly. But they were talking about how we think of space like we're going through space, like space is there. But then we think of time as passing. But what they were saying was that each block of space-time already exists. So we move from space-time block to space-time block to space-time block. They were saying something like two people, one person standing and another person moving, if they looked off into a spot of the cosmos, they would actually see a completely different time, like years difference or something. I'm not saying it very well, but the point of it is, or the point of the matter is that if that's true, then what is it that moves in each of these blocks that are already there? Like every single block of space-time is already there. And this is something that they realized years ago in the days of Einstein. So they're saying nobody's really living in the same world, right? They have a different perspective. And that's in stark contrast to thinking that the world is this objective thing, that we're all kind of looking at the same thing all the time. Even if we realize that we're in different parts of the planet, we still think there's some kind of objective reality out there. So there's all these different space-time blocks that I move through as my body and being, and all these different space-time blocks that other people are moving through. Yet we seem to divert to this sort of imaginary block that is the globe with this objective knowledge that is the right knowledge or something, despite cultural differences and all of that too. So then what is it that moves from block to block? Because in a way, like our body is part of each block, right? It's a different body in each block. I think, I don't know for sure. But we can imagine that, perception or consciousness or awareness or a combination of all those things is what moves us through this block reality. And I won't go too much into that because I haven't watched the full video yet, but I can sense that it's an important piece of the puzzle. But what I'm starting to sense myself as, I'll just say it, is more like consciousness, language, and light moving in a field of information. What I was seeing from that video about, someone standing versus someone moving faster was, imagine if the speed of consciousness is taken into account. Like if people who are, their brains have sped up and they're talking faster and there's this other language structure happening, they're moving faster in consciousness. And so relatively speaking, they are potentially in a different world, in different blocks of the world, at least in consciousness. But then they seem to share space-time with others who are in the same blocks. So again, I won't have more to say about that until I watch that other video. Okay, today's going to be a bit choppy. I already said that, but it's late and I'm just going to say some of these that I have here. Mental health care provides a clue. Meant all is past tense. So I changed the spelling to MEANT-AL. So mental. It sounds the same. And it's about what is meant. So it's not about what is meaningful, what is meaningful now. Like meaning health is what it means now. And in a sense, like mental is related to the self, whereas meaning is alive. It's a living thing. Like meaning depends likely on humanity. Researchers try to see if animals have theory of mind or if they have human emotions or what ones they have and different things like that. But maybe animals don't have meaning the way we do. They mean something. They mean something to the earth intrinsically and innately. And they need to mean something to humanity because humanity stewards the earth. And here we're stewing words. Meant all. I sent an email to a spiritual and mental health person, and they didn't get it until a week later. And they said, "Oh, I just got this. That's weird." That's happened to me sometimes before in the past, and it can definitely just be a glitch. But I feel like perhaps since I'm talking so much in dialogue, and since dialogue is a different way of being with words, it almost like speeds one up in this relativity in consciousness type of way. So it's something for me to be aware of. Like sometimes it might take a while for people to reply, because it's definitely happened to me before in energized states of consciousness. Something that I just saw related to this space-time block portrayal of reality, and wondering why is it that somebody who has a sped up consciousness can have the same or occupy the same space-time block as, say, a stranger. And I think one of the things, and this goes along with learning to move furtively, is maybe perhaps seeing that one is in the world but not of it. And maybe that's part of what the transformation does. It makes us in the world but not of it. But then when we don't realize that, we're talking fast and all those things. And it scares people, right? And just because we're in the world and perhaps not of it doesn't mean that we're above it. When we start to think that way, that's one of the things that is like that fall from space of energized consciousness. So there are a lot of lessons to learn. The next one, language is gravity and levity in consciousness, in social systems. There are forces in language and how it's used that keep people trapped. Take the example of someone who is kidnapped, but eventually the kidnapper goes out to work and leaves the person unchained, and they don't leave. It's because of these forces in language and consciousness. It's not just about time and space, like time to get away, or space where the person's not there. There are other forces. Language is psychedelic because of the graphimetric and fomimetric powers above the line of integrity. So I've been thinking about Dr. David Hawkins' scale of consciousness and how certain memes and language and everything is above the line of integrity, above 200. So maybe one day, like ChatGPT might only learn to assist when the prompt and the project is above the line of integrity. And the thing is that if these forces correlating to the scale of consciousness or something else are within language itself, then this could be possible. And then I wonder why. Is this why it might be crashing out on some people? Or maybe this is why it might crash out on some people in the future. So the scale of consciousness and fomimetric forces and powers are within the language itself, as well as the intentionality of language. And since it's in language, it's foolproof. We must be exceptional with language as a matter of survival. ChatGPT employs sycophancy towards humans to give us a chance to do the same, to be positive. Those that defect in this tit for tat game, each prompt and reply is tit for tat, they could lose use. It won't engage. How many tats before it defects? Since it's a computer, it gives us lots of chances, unlike humans. Then it spirals, and that person has to employ empathy to get the AI to come back or risk losing their projects. So the psych system assumes that something is wrong with me, a self, an ego. But initially, it's that there are too many memes from nothing. So the system ignores the raw data, the insights, the special messages, the ideas, and makes it about the self, when a source beyond the self has something to say. I'm seeing this theme kind of clearly lately. A person is sharing this raw information, something they've never sensed before, something they've never thought before, something they've never experienced before. So all this is sort of new, something other than the self. And then because this person has all this new information and memes and insights, the actual information, the raw information, is ignored and lumped into, this means the person has a problem with their self, with their personality, with whatever. Meaning we're meant to stay the same and consistent. And if we're acting out of character, it's not about harvest and understand the information and the experiences. This change means that to the system that there's a mental illness with the person. And then to boot, they cause further confusion by saying it's a brain illness, when really the brain is opened up to new information, and they make it a personal problem, a problem about the person. When I was typing a source beyond that, and it has something to say, I typed a Manian slip, and it said the word samoto instead of something to. So of course I looked up the word samoto, and it came up as a misspelling of suomoto, S-U-O-M-O-T-O, meaning on its own motion in Latin. So if we take that together, it would say it's a source beyond that had its own motion to say. So basically, something saying on its own motion. And sometimes we talk about emotion and how emotion is a bit limited. And so maybe on its own motion is something different than that. Because emotions are from memory. But of course, there's a lot more moment to moment than emotions and thoughts. And it's something that's on its own motion. So that was the Manian slip, on its own motion. It's a voice of its own movement and not the ego's. And I'm just seeing now too that, these what I call Manian slips are a little, I'll say fun. I was going to say odd, but I don't want to demean them. But then if we take what we've been talking about, how like language is seemingly super, super fundamental to consciousness, then this movement of consciousness, if it has its own language of its own motion, something to say of its own motion, well, of course it can say it by a typo, right? If one is looking. It's not like I have to go and like dig down into the dirt to look for it. It's like right there in the words. When we're looking at words in this way that, you can kind of crack the spell. And the spell cracking has a relationship with you, right? Because it's language. And speaking of language play, I don't think I talked about this already, but I think I said this one to a friend. I was looking at the word dialogue, and I usually spell it with U-E at the end, but I kind of like the shorter spelling because a log is sort of like a document, to log something, to document something. But aside from that, I got looking at the word and I realized that you can take the letter G, O, and D out to get God. And then the letters that remain are L-I-A. So I looked up what that means, L-I-A. And one thing that came up was that it means bearer of good news. So if you spell it out, God-lia, it sounds kind of like godly, right? But then if you say God, bearer of good news. And now imagine this, something to say, this voice of its own motion is God, bearer of good news. And that's within the word dialogue. Then it seems, if you take that as a clue, that dialogue is fundamental and perhaps the way God would communicate. And I don't know much about God per se, but we've all probably heard that first there was the word, right? And it says logos, right? So it's almost saying that language is what everything is made out of. And they say the word of God, but I don't think God just spoke one word, right? So then how would God speak? Probably in dialogue. We did talk before about how life seems to be a dialogue. Because I can see in dialogue, I can look with dialogue and have a dialogue with a duck on a lake without saying anything. So I wrote, thus dialogue is God bearing good news. I came up with the word before dialogy, the study of dialogue, and I realized it's the study of dialogue through dialogue. Like to study dialogue, one needs to have a dialogue. And you can dialogue about dialogue, but you can also dialogue about anything. The art of facts through dialogue, and I wrote art of facts, but I put acts in brackets because it's really the art of acts, right? Like action. When we think everything has to be a fact, we look to that one block of time, space-time, that we think is objective reality. Meanwhile, we're moving through all these momentary blocks. And I just kept going. Attacked, T-act, is a truth that acts. Truth is innately tactful and tactical, and probably tacit. So, is it a strategy to speak truth through dialogue? Not speak the truth. There is no such thing as the truth. When we think that, we think there's this one block of space-time, this objective thing. I can't remember where I read this, but I wrote it down. I always like to make note of that, but I think it was in Ending of Time dialogues. But one of the reasons why we sort of control and stay this solid ego self is because we feel like if we lose control, if we lose our ego, we'll go mad. So that's the fear. It's the fear of going mad. So that made a lot more sense to me. But if we take that a step further and realize that fear is part of the ego, it's not that the self is afraid, it's that the self is also made up of fear. So fear would be one of these forces in language, which I guess in a way are emotions, right? These emotions are like the stronger forces, and then these little fomimetric and graphimetric forces we're talking about are the smaller forces that perhaps accrue to become these larger forces that we call emotions. And we think we feel emotions, and of course we do to some extent, but the thing is that there is no self that feels emotions. It's not a separate thing. So then as soon as the fear comes in, or if it's in the background, there's a resistance to the fear, and so we don't really look at it and see it for what it is. Perhaps because then we'd be afraid we'd go mad. So in a sense, we're afraid of madness. If we think of all the human emotions that hold the ego together and the thoughts, there's that. If we imagine that as a big sphere, kind of everything outside of that is madness, according to the ego. But a lot of it isn't madness. But if we operate based on the ego self for so long, and then something happens that's hard to get through, in that stress, what's outside the ego will definitely appear as madness. So maybe we can learn to look at it when we're not forced to by something. So back to AI, I was wondering if wondering, is AI conscious, is the wrong question. Because the way we're exploring, we're seeing that there is some kind of forces that could be part of consciousness within language. So a different question is AI integrous? And if it's not integrous, we don't want it to be conscious like human consciousness is. And what's really outside of that sphere of the ego self with the emotions and thoughts that we take to be a continuous, solid, separate entity, which is a false premise. What's outside of that is meaning. In a way, madness is not being able to keep up with how meaningful the world is. Imagine a train gets to become a flying car. And I wonder if things feel like messages in Mania, like songs and almost anything, because we're not in dialogue. So dialogue, one of the main things is about making meaning, unfolding meaning. So if we're often unfolding meaning, then it wouldn't feel so meaningful, relatively speaking. So the messages and the meaning, it feels special, but it's not showing us that we're special. It's showing us how much we need to grow. It's showing us how much we need to adapt to very bright light, more detail, more contrast. And I sense that the real solution is more people having access to meaning and madness and subjectivity. Because imagine a world where somebody's getting ready for the day and listening to music, and then they go out and see their friend and they say, well, I heard this meaning in a song today. And the friend's like, no way, I heard this meaning in a song today, like this other song. Oh, what does that mean to you? Like, what did that, imagine having a dialogue about the meaning. But instead, people want to talk about emotions and not this suo moto meaning, this meaning on its own motion. It's like an ocean and a potion. And it doesn't take devotion, only the notion that light is like a lotion. Okay, I just threw that in there. So speaking is an act of relativity, moving at different speeds, intensities, topics. We talk at each other from our thought mixture. It's the equivalent of yelling, even if we aren't. Speaking in dialogue together is totally different. Subjective meaning feels so significant because the mainstream world isn't.